Hello and welcome to World News on TVP World. I'm Marie Cato. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte met with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk in Warsaw on Wednesday. The current security situation in Europe, threats coming from Russia, and NATO's role as a security guarantor were at the top of the agenda of their talks. Speaking at a joint press conference, Tusk emphasized that, quote, Poland expects its allies to treat it as a key link in the defense of Europe and NATO.
Who more than Poland deserves full support and full guarantees from NATO? We can't change our geographical position, we can't change our history, but we are determined like no other NATO country. When it comes to defense spending, we really spend a lot on defense. We also count on you, Secretary General, as well as our American allies, but also Europe, because we believe in these two pillars which are indispensable to treat Poland the way it deserves, is a key link in the defense of Europe and NATO.
At a joint press conference with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte made a strong statement regarding the defense of Poland and NATO territory. Rutte emphasized that any attempt to attack Poland or any NATO member state would be met with the full force of the alliance.
Let me be absolutely clear, dear Donald. When it comes to the defense of Poland and the general defense of NATO territory, if anyone were to miscalculate and think they can get away with an attack on Poland or on any other ally, they will be met with the full force of this fierce alliance. Our reaction will be devastating. This has to be very clear to Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin and anyone else who wants to attack us.
Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz visited Jasionka near Rzeszów, where Polish and Norwegian troops are stationed at the Pol-Log hub, a logistical center crucial for deliveries of humanitarian and military aid to Ukraine. Kosiniak-Kamysz discussed the NSATU mission, which is focused on ensuring the smooth transfer of military equipment to Ukraine.
Protection and the entire mission of support for Ukraine is now under NATO's command. This decision was made in Washington. Until now, the relationships have been bilateral, particularly between Ukraine and the United States, with strong support from Poland, the United Kingdom and other countries. However, since the NATO summit decision, there are no longer bilateral relations. A new NATO mission, NSATU, has been established. This mission is responsible for the transfer of equipment to Ukraine, ensuring logistics, training Ukrainian soldiers, and preparing them with operational skills for post-war readiness for the Ukrainian army. These three tasks are now the focus of the new NATO command and operation. General Bartoszek, present here with me, is the deputy head of NSATU and will be responsible for the most crucial part for us, logistics, including logistics centers in Poland, Slovakia and Romania.
A partial naval ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. This is the outcome of the last round of Riyadh negotiations between the US and Russian delegations on Tuesday. At the same time, Ukraine remains affected by continuous attacks aimed at its cities. Our Kiev correspondent Oz Chatterjee has the details.
The Ukrainian government reacted with a sense of dismay at the news coming out of Riyadh, the Saudi capital, following talks between a US delegation and the Russian delegation about this proposal for a ceasefire in the Black Sea region, with Kiev reacting to the news that sanctions relief was being offered to the Russians with regards to agricultural exports and fertilizer, and potentially even as going as far as including banking access, restoring banking access for those transactions to be made. However, the Ukrainians did further agree to these proposals, again putting the onus back on the Russians. President Zelenskyy released a statement on Tuesday night before he headed off to France for talks with Emmanuel Macron for the coalition of the willing. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We believe that this is a weakening of the position and a weakening of sanctions, in our opinion. We do not yet know the details of this item and we were not present at the meeting, so I cannot say anything. But this was not on our agenda. The American side raised it. Umerov contacted me. I said that this is not a discussion of an unconditional ceasefire, even a partial ceasefire in the sky and at sea, regarding the removal of certain obstacles for the Russians regarding agricultural products. And it is too early to say that it will work, but these were the right meetings, the right decisions, the right steps. No one can accuse Ukraine of not moving towards sustainable peace after this.
So it's important to note as well that as far as the Ukrainian government are concerned, what's happening in the Black Sea, what's being offered a ceasefire there, is effectively the status quo that Ukraine had managed to achieve after pushing the Russian Black Sea fleet out of Sevastopol in occupied Crimea through a campaign of naval drones. They managed to sink very high-profile Russian ships in the Black Sea and effectively restored freedom of navigation for Ukrainian ships traveling to Ukrainian ports, traveling with grain. They've effectively managed to restore that access unilaterally. So it's unclear from Ukraine's perspective what they're getting out of this deal. Certainly they're not receiving huge concessions from Russia. However, in exchange for receiving very little, the Russians are being offered this deal of sanctions relief, something that Putin has been calling for a long time now. So from the Ukrainian perspective, it's unclear what they're getting from this. From the Russian perspective, it's clear that they're going to get some form of sanctions relief from this. But President Zelenskyy using the opportunity to react to it, saying we will see how serious the Russians are about these proposals given their activity over the coming days. Will they continue to strike Ukrainian cities? So far, very little has changed. Russia continues to strike Ukraine, and the Ukrainian government is moving forward with discussions with Europe about concrete security guarantees if any such ceasefire, wider ceasefire in Ukraine is managed to be achieved over the coming weeks through diplomacy. It's Oz Chatterjee reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
Overnight, the Russian army attacked Volodymyr Zelenskyy's hometown of Kryvyi Rih. The drone strike resulted in several fires and infrastructure damage, but no casualties. At least 15 explosions have been reported by Kryvyi Rih residents. The head of the Dnipropetrovsk military administration, Serhiy Lysak, said the Ukrainian air defense managed to down 12 UAVs over the region. Fires that broke out in the aftermath of the attack were quickly extinguished by firefighters. Apart from Zelenskyy's hometown itself, the city of Nikopol and the villages of Marhanets were hit, with the strike damaging 2 residential buildings and 1 car. The Russian army has also attacked the Sumy region, as well as communities in the Donetsk, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia regions. Overall, last night, some 117 Russian drones invaded Ukrainian airspace. So far, there are no reports of casualties. A Russian court today sentenced 23 Ukrainians linked to the Azov battalion to lengthy prison terms on the charges of terrorism. According to the site Media Zona, 12 Ukrainians were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 13 to 23 years in high-security colonies. Another 11 were sentenced in absentia, having already returned to Ukraine as part of a prisoner exchange. The cases were initially handled in the so-called Donetsk People's Republic before being transferred to Rostov-on-Don, where the accused were charged with attempting to seize power and engaging in terrorist activities. Some of the detainees had participated in the defense of Mariupol and the Azovstal steel plant, while others were no longer serving when the Russian invasion began. Ukrainian authorities condemned the trial as a political show, saying it violated international law. The accused themselves say that they were tortured and were forced to sign false testimonies. The government of Denmark has announced it will expedite drafting women into the armed forces. The updated timeline now sees women joining the ranks next year rather than January 2027 as the original plan envisioned.
In light of the current security situation, the size of the army must be expanded, Danish Minister of Defense Troels Lund Poulsen has said. Women who turn 18 after July 1st, 2025 could be required to take part in a draft lottery to select conscripts for service. The lottery, however, will be held only if there were not enough volunteers to fill the ranks in a given year. Beginning next year, compulsory military service in Denmark will also be extended from 4 to 11 months. The decision to speed up the draft for women was possible due to an agreement in the Danish parliament between the ruling and opposition parties.
Thank you for joining us today.
During recent talks in Brussels, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić expressed optimism about Serbia's EU accession, reaffirming his country's commitment to European integration. He also briefed European officials on Serbia's domestic situation, highlighting the peaceful nature of recent protests that swept the country and denying use of sound cannon to disperse crowds, an accusation which emerged following videos on social media showing people running away from a mysterious noise.
We primarily discussed Serbia's strategic path to the EU and how committed Serbia is and wants to be to this goal. I said that Serbia will be absolutely committed to this goal, even more so than before. However, I also mentioned that I expect a decision soon regarding the formation of a new government or new elections. We discussed the situation in Serbia, and I told my hosts that no sound cannon was used, and that we are ready to verify this. We will respond to the European Court of Human Rights, even though the use of similar devices is not banned anywhere in Europe, and they're used almost daily in the United States. We didn't use it, we have nothing to hide, and we are fully open to it being examined in every possible way. I believe they could see how much we wanted to preserve complete peace, how patient we were in our intention to avoid showing any nervousness or applying force. So we will continue to act in this manner.
Despite the arrest of 1,400 protesters, journalists and lawyers, thousands of people in Turkey have turned out last night for the 7th consecutive night of demonstrations. These took place even after Istanbul authorities banned mass gatherings and closed roads to, quote, maintain public order.
Responding to another night of protests, police in Ankara and Istanbul used water cannons and rubber bullets to disperse the crowds. The nightly demonstrations began last Wednesday when Istanbul mayor and main rival of Turkish President Erdogan, Ekrem İmamoğlu, was arrested on corruption charges. İmamoğlu was one of over 100 people detained last week as part of the investigation. Others swept up in the arrests included politicians, journalists and entrepreneurs, as well as a photographer for the French AFP news agency.
A high-profile U.S. delegation led by Vice President J.D. Vance will arrive in Greenland on Friday, and the controversy extends well beyond the island itself. The visit comes amid renewed threats from President Donald Trump to bring the territory under U.S. control.
The Vice President and Second Lady are set to tour the Bidufik space base to discuss Arctic security and meet U.S. forces stationed there. Usha Vance reportedly planned a cultural trip before her husband announced he would join her.
Unfortunately, leaders in both America and in Denmark, I think, ignored Greenland for far too long. That's been bad for Greenland. It's also been bad for the security of the entire world. We think we can take things in a different direction, so I'm going to go check it out.
The 3-day visit, from Thursday to Saturday, also includes National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Energy Secretary Chris Wright. Usha Vance's initial plan to attend a popular dog sled race in Greenland was criticized as an unacceptable pressure on the semi-autonomous Danish territory.
This is clearly not a visit that is about what Greenland needs or what Greenland wants from visits from the outside now. And therefore, I have to say that it is an unacceptable pressure that is being put on both Greenland and Denmark in this situation. And it is also a pressure that we will resist.
The U.S. delegation has since removed the dog sled event from its itinerary, earning approval from Denmark's foreign minister on Wednesday, who stressed there is no objection to Washington's visit to its own base in Bidufik, northern Greenland. Still, the higher-profile trip arrives amid growing worries that the U.S. might seek greater influence over the Arctic territory.
It's a challenge for the Danish government because Greenland is part of Denmark. At the same time, we need to have good relations with the US in terms of defense, in terms of economy. Right now, Europe is in a very, very critical junction, and everyone needs to think about what to do and what not to do, and we need to think about our relations with the US.
As Vice President Vance now heads to the island, many in Denmark and Greenland question the visit's true outcome and whether it signals something far more consequential. One thing is certain, the trip will stir strong emotions on both sides of the Arctic.
And that wraps up World News at 2 p.m. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned for more on TVP World. Goodbye.